we'll start our trip here. I think oh, there we go. Okay. Now, many of you in Phoenix have probably eaten at the old spaghetti factory in Phoenix. It was 2 homes that they connected to make the, in the middle to make the big spaghetti factory restaurant. And, you know, generally all the spaghetti factories around the United States, they all have ghost stories for some reason. Now, the story on the spaghetti factory had been on the line for years and years and years. And the story always told about a horrific scream in the restaurant. 2 police officers were there having dinner. They went upstairs to find out, you know, what was going on. They came down. They told the owner, don't ever let anybody go up there. You know, and I always thought, what could have been so horrific that they said that? So when I was, you know, doing the research for my book, Dining with the Dead, I said, you know, outreach to everyone. If they had a good ghost story about any restaurant, to get in touch with me, we could use the story for the book. I lucked out. I got a message from the 2 police officers that were there that heard the scream. They invited me for lunch at the spaghetti factory. So I met them for lunch. We sat down by the old trolley car. That's where they were sitting the night they heard the scream. So I'm thinking, I've told my friends, I'm getting the scoop of the year. I've always wanted to know what the horrific thing they saw up there, why it was so scary and everything. And so we're sitting there talking, and they said they had come there for dinner, and in the car, they heard the scream, and being police officers, they had to investigate and find out what was going on. So they went to their vehicles, got their flashlights, came back in, and told them, we have to search the building top to bottom. So they went upstairs, poked around up there with the flashlights. They went down in the basement. And the amazing thing there, they called the manager down. They go, you got to look at this, you know, because all the chairs were in a pyramid. So, you know, how did that happen? And the manager says, I don't know. This happens every once in a while. I come down here, we've got a pyramid going on. So I'm sitting there with my tablet. I'm waiting. Where's that scoop story? You know, what about the scream? What was so horrific? And they go, Deb, you've investigated here. You've been up there. You've seen it. There's wires hanging down. The carpeting was torn out. Plasters coming off the walls. The steps were all rickety. We just told them, don't ever let anybody ever go up there because it's just dangerous. They never did find out where the scream came from. It must have been the ghost. Now, earlier before that, we were doing a investigations for azcentral.com. They were doing a little internet thing. So we were asked to be the paranormal team that went on their investigations. We went with their medium who walked through the building, and then they left us to do the investigation. So some of us were upstairs in this room where the rickety room was, and the other one, our tech guy, was down in the basement. So we were there for probably 3 or 4 hours after closing. And when we were done, I said to the tech guy, I hope we got something for, you know, AZ Central. So a couple days later, he messaged me. And he says, well, you know, I got a recording when you asked that question on, you know, that statement. I hope that, you know, we got something. The message on the recorder came back and said, you already did. So we got a voice that told us that. And then later on, we were playing more EVPs, which is voice, you know, recordings. And another voice recording came back and said, remember who we are. So you always have to remember these spirits. They're very, very, very historic. They want to be known. Next slide. All right, San Carlos Hotel in Phoenix. Almost everybody has been there. It's a very popular hotel. It's still, you know, very popular downtown Phoenix attraction. Now, the story that San Carlos goes, you know, was built and opened up about in 1928. It was built on the grounds of Arizona's first school. And below that, there was artesian well. That was, you know, the Native Americans used the waters. The schoolhouse used the waters, and the hotel used the water as well. And water is something that attracts spirits. That's a gimme. And so And when we went there, you go down to the basement, you're gonna think, oh, it's a nice little well. No, it looks like R2D2 if you ever see it. But at the same time, their most famous ghost is Leon Jensen. And Leon came in just a few months after the hotel opened up. She was coming to Phoenix from LA for treatments for TB, tuberculosis. So she frequented coming back and forth looking for treatments. They say that she was also having an affair with a bellboy from another one of the hotels. And she came this last time. The doctor didn't have very much hope for her. He pretty much said, you're just going to have to ride this out. I don't know if you're going to make it or not. She found out that the bellboy was seeing another woman. So she was very, very despondent. She went up to the roof, jumped off from that top roof there. She was staying on the third floor, went up to the top, landed right there on the corner of Monroe and Central to her death. And then she had little messages for the coroner in the hotel, where to send her body, you know, how to take care of things. Well, she is still the most popular ghost at the hotel. They smell her perfume on the third floor. Sometimes they see her walking up on the seventh floor. She makes her final walk. And, you know, you can just feel her presence all the time of despair. We also feel children in the hotel, and they think those are children that are, you know, kind of, you know, left over from when there was the schoolhouse. So that's two important things there at that hotel. Hotels are often very haunted, and sometimes it's just by guests who frequent the hotels because they had their honeymoon there, or it was their best vacation ever. So there's all kinds of spirits that come to old. Next.
Deb, before I move on to the next slide, there was a question.
Yeah.
Someone asked, you'd mentioned that spirits are attracted to water. Why is that? And what else are they attracted to? What deters them? Also, we're having some issues with your volume. I don't know if it's because you're moving away from your machine or what's going on.
I can get closer. Is that a little better?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, I can get a little closer to the mic here. For the water and electrical, it's just elements that create an energy so that they have something to manifest from. So that's why water is important. We find a lot of spirits near railroad tracks because they have the energy from the railroad lines. And I'm sure with the light rail going through, it's also picking up a lot of energy as well. So they just used elements of energy like water and electrical to manifest. So basically an energy. Okay, Grand Canyon Caverns. This is off of Route 66 near Peach Springs. And this was a gentleman, Mr. Peck was on his way to a poker game one Saturday night, and he almost fell into a hole. He brought a bunch of his friends the next day. They went back to this hole, looked down, and they could, you know, put lanterns down. They could see flecks of gold, they thought. So they were climbing down in this cave. They thought they were going to be rich, but no, it's just a plain old cave with, you know, granite rock, a little bit of crystal here and there, nothing special. But then they thought of another thing. Well, what if we go down there and explore this, and then we can, you know, charge, you know, 25 cents, 50 cents for people to come down. We'll have the next tourist attraction. So that's what they did. They found skeleton remains of two Native Americans. And so they advertised that they found, you know, lost cavemen. They found old, you know, animals down there and said they were dinosaurs. They just kind of made, you know, over exaggerated, but they did, you know, feel that this was the neatest attraction ever. Now, there are spirits down there of the Native Americans because it was kind of a burial site for them. And so we were asked to come up and spend the weekend there. And there's inside the cave in the bottom, there's like I would say like a motorhome platform where you can, like 5 people could stay there. There's also a bunkhouse where another group could stay. So that's what we did. We divided up our team. 5 of us were in one area in the bunkhouse and the other ones did the cave. Now, the funny thing is when we were on the cave, they had a stereo hi-fi there. And so we started searching through the records and we found a Elton John album. So we put that on the stereo, got the hairbrushes out, and we're all rocking out to The Bitch Is Back. And we're dancing, having a good old time. We get done, we're going like, we probably just embedded our song into the limestone granite walls. And 100 years from now, someone's going to be coming down here, exploring the cave, and they're going to start hearing that song. Well, sure enough, when Ghost Adventures filmed here, they're doing their episode, and there's a scene where they're walking down the corridor down in the cave, and they started hearing voices. And right away, it was like, we picked up a voice of this Native American tribe, and we couldn't make it out what they were saying. But if you watch that show next time, listen real closely, you're going to hear them say, "The bitch is back." You can go on to the next. All right, the Inn at Castle Rock in Bisbee. I actually have a second home in Bisbee, across the street from the cemetery, of course, which makes it real handy dandy for chasing spirits. And this picture shows Castle Rock, which is a very famous landmark in Bisbee because it kind of gives an impression of a castle. Right across the street from the Castle Rock, you see a little boarding house looking building. That is the Inn at Castle Rock. And their ghost story goes like this. There was a gentleman staying there, and he was cleaning a gun. And at this very same time, there was a woman walking up the street, and by the name of Mabel. And she was coming home from church. And just as she was passing back by Castle Rock, the gun went off and it shot her dead. She fell flat on the sidewalk. Of course, he wasn't, charged with any crime because it was an accident. A lot of people who stay at the Inn at Castle Rock say there's a woman who roams room to room, and they believe that it's Mabel looking for her, the person who shot her, not on purpose, but it's still, she couldn't figure out, what had happened. So if you stay there, you might encounter her. Next one, please. And probably a lot of you been out to Havasu, been out to the London Bridge. Well, they did actually assemble the London Bridge in London piece by piece. They numbered all the bricks and pieces of the bridge, put it in crates, brought it out here. So it went from the Thames River to, Lake Havasu, and they reassembled it. So a lot of people tell me that when you're walking across the bridge really, really late at night, that you often see people in early 1800 attired or maybe Victorian attire walking across the bridge, women in long dresses, men with top hats on. And it just, their residual energy has remained with the bridge. And that's just the energy that has kind of like stuck to the bridge like a VCR tape that just keeps playing over and over and over. And you got to remember, this bridge was there. Underneath the bridge, people died during the plagues and different things like that. So it holds in a lot of strange negative energy from illnesses and deaths. So, when you go there next time, just kind of take a walk across there really late at night, see what you discover. Next one, please.
Your sound is kind of cutting out a little bit again.
Cutting out?
Mm-hmm.
You get closer again. All right. The Yuma Territorial Prison, that's out in Yuma. And as you can imagine, this place was a real hellhole in the wintertime. People were like cold, and in the summertime was 130 degrees. There was never anything just half and half here. And but there was a very humane prison. They took good care of you. You got good medical treatment. It was just, such a horrible, hot place to be. Now they have, of course, the stories about the hole where the dark cell where people would go in there and when you were when you were really, really, really bad. But then the guards would go up on the top and drop down snakes. They would drop down scorpions just to make your stay in the dark cell even more miserable. Now, we were one of the few teams that have actually been invited, and we actually have spent the entire night there from early in the evening over until, breakfast time. Not many people have gotten the opportunity to do that. And of course, when we do it, it's the only bad thing around when you investigate there, you are close to the freeway. So there is kind of a noise factor sometimes. But on the other hand, if you find a nice quiet spot, you might pick up some energies from spirits. Now they do have it's the spirit of John Ryan, and he is in one of the cells. He was just such a despicable, ugly, ugly, ugly person in the prison. He would murder anybody at the drop of the hat. He just was mean, evil. And so when my team was there, they were all sitting outside of his cell. And they started talking to him all during the night, asking him, why did you do these crimes? You're just a terrible, terrible person. And right about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, they start seeing a shadow pacing in that cell. So they just kept, talking to him and little instigate him in a little bit. And they were watching for the longest time, and then suddenly he was gone. But he did hang himself in his cell, so his spirit has remained behind, forever and ever, serving time at the prison. Next.
All right, so 2 questions.
Yes.
One, when you were telling the story about the old spaghetti factory incident, do you know what year that was?
It was probably the gentlemen that were there. See, I talked to them. It was probably in the early 90s, because that's when I first started seeing it all over the internet. The experience where they heard the scream.
Okay, and then 2 kind of related questions.
Yes.
I guess we can start with the general and then move to the specifics. So
Okay.
if you were interested generally in having a place investigated, how would you do it? And then related, if you wanted to investigate a specific place, say the territorial prison, how would you go about making those arrangements?
Okay. Well, if you had an investigation like at your business or something like that, then you would just, there's an abundance of paranormal teams now. When I first started doing this in 94, there was probably only 3 teams in Arizona. Now there's probably, I don't know, probably 300, 400. So there you have a big choice. You just kind of Google paranormal teams, contact one that you think is nearby you, and they will, be glad to come and check things out. I like to do historical locations better, because then you have the opportunity of going into old records, old newspapers, death certificates, to kind of maybe piece together who the spirit might be. If you have a spirit in your home, a lot of these teams love to come out and do what we call, the home investigations, where they will try to find maybe some kind of maybe electrical dysfunction or plumbing dysfunction in your home that it's causing the weird energy. Sometimes that's all it is. I know I went to a home one time, and the mother was saying the kids were reporting scratching on their windows all night. We went out there and noticed that the tree branches were rubbing on their windows, and we told them, if you trim your tree, you're not going to have that problem any longer. So that's basically it. You find a team that's, that fits your needs. Now, when I want to find, say I wanted to investigate the Yuma Territorial Prison, I go online and find the, who's the manager, who's the owner, who's, running the operation at this place, and ask them if I can bring maybe a couple people with me and do an investigation, that they're welcome to stay there with us if they wish. I have a pretty good reputation through all these years, so I invite them to, to check me out as far as what we've done over the years to show that we're not going to fly by night, and we're not going to come there and destroy their location. But a lot of people are open to having investigations and historical places, and others aren't. Sometimes they don't want that stigma of being haunted because they're afraid people won't come there anymore. So it's a little of both. Okay, Fort Bowie Cemetery. That's down in Cochise County. On the way to the fort. The fort is an abandoned fort, but it's still open for visitors, and they have a historic museum there. Now, the story about the cemeteries, you have to hike into the fort. So halfway through the hike, you come along to the cemetery. So they have it all fenced off now to keep out cattle and critters. But every day the rangers down at the fort come up here to make sure everything's clean. They leave little maps for people so they can walk around the cemetery and read about the people buried here. Well, when we went to visit, we stopped at the cemetery and then we went on down to the fort area. And of course, my always question is the place haunted? And they said, well, the place that we get the most action is up at the cemetery. And it's not in the cemetery, it's the road that goes past it. They said that one day they were up there cleaning the cemetery up, putting their little maps and flyers out and such. And all of a sudden they heard horses coming. And it wasn't just one horse, it was like, a whole regiment of horses galloping down the road on the way to the fort. And they stood there because they know when there's a trail ride coming through or a group of people, because they have to kind of pre-register to let the people down there know that they're going to have guests. But they waited and waited for this group of horses to come. Nobody ever came. And then the next thing you know, this group of horses, like a cavalry, rode past them, sight unseen. They could hear the horses, but they couldn't see the horses. So they knew that it was like, a group of cavalry soldiers. Very interesting place to learn about spirits. They're still out there working. Next. Okay, this is a SMURTHWAITE house. This is in Phoenix. This is down at the old Pioneer Cemetery. Nothing, ever evil, bad here. But this house was originally on 7th Street, and they moved it over here to be the offices for the Pioneer Cemetery. So this is where I'm a volunteer here, and this is where we come to do our research, plan our events, take people out on tours of the house and tours of the cemetery. So it's a very popular place. But, there was the Connells who lived here and at one time, and they both did die up in the bedrooms of the house. Now, we have smelled cigar smoke upstairs a couple times from Mr. Connell. And Miss SMURTHWAITE had her art gallery here when it was on 7th Street. And then when she passed away, she, gave the house to the city of Phoenix to use as a museum or, some place of historic meaning for them. So that's why it ended here. Now, we had a little lady that was one of our preservationists. Her name was Marge, and Marge loved the cemetery. She loved the cemetery so much. You could ask her, where is so and so buried? And she would say, go out the door, turn right, go down about 3 rows, make a left, go past, the Smith grave, and then turn right, go down 3 more, and you would be there. She knew exactly where everybody was buried. It was just sensational that she could do this. And she was always wanting, her dream was to have all the grave markers taken care of and repaired and preserved for future people to enjoy. And happily, we've been doing fundraisers for about the last 5 or 6 years, and that's exactly what we do now. We do fundraisers and we raise money so that we can afford to fix the stones. Now, few people have seen Marge in the house. They've come downstairs and she was sitting in the parlor room, and they recognized her right away because she was very tiny, very short, little white hair. She always wore like a little checkered blouse and blue jeans, and she would look up at them and look there. And so she's just really, really, really pleased that we're doing the work that she, wished to accomplish. So there's also lovely ghosts out there. Next. Camp Naco is down by Naco, right on the border, and it's near Bisbee. And my friend Fran, who lived in Bisbee at the time, was able to get us into the property because it's very, very hard to get in here. And you can drive by and look through the fence most of the time, but she was able to get us inside. So we felt so privileged to be able to go into these old barracks and do our investigation. We did, I think we were saw a lot of bats, and we did kind of try to make contact with some of the soldiers. Some Buffalo soldiers actually worked here at a time, but it was just very, very, very unique being able to explore an old fort ghost town. Next, I'm going to grab a drink of water. Okay, the stockyards in Phoenix. When I first moved to Phoenix back in the day, the stockyards was actually still here. I grew up in Nebraska, in Omaha, so the stockyards was, big there. So I was amazed to find out that Phoenix actually had a smaller version of the stockyards. This little booth you're seeing there in the corner is where John Wayne, Barry Goldwater, and my Western hero, Ben Jonson, would often come for lunch or dinner. And they'd sit back there because it was a little bit secluded, a little bit out of the way, still out in the open, but, they were kind of hidden a little bit in the corner. Well, Ben Jonson, I worked for like I mentioned earlier, I worked for the MVD for 25 years. And Ben Jonson would come to our office all the time to register his trailers, his trucks, all his vehicles. The luck of the draw, I got him as my, client every time. I don't know what it was. It was just kind of magical. And so, but he always, I had to send him out just like everybody else. He was always missing something. He would come back into the room and he'd be going, "Where's my little girlfriend? Where's my little girlfriend?" And I would, motion for him to come over and I would finish up his work. He was always very, very kind. He would always, sit there and sign autographs for anybody who came into the MVD office. Now, the night we were investigating this restaurant, I asked, "Can I sit in the booth? I want to see if I can pick up the spirit of Ben Jonson." Now you can see they have the table set for dinner the next day because this was late at night and there's plates on the tables, wine glasses on the tables, and silverware. So I must have sat there for a half hour or longer waiting to, for anything to happen. And I said, "Ben, this is Deb, your little girlfriend. If you're going to be here in the restaurant tonight, can you ping one of the wine glasses for me?" So I waited and waited and waited. And finally, probably after about 30 minutes, I just had this flash before me. I saw a brown, leather saddle with Ben Jonson's name written on it. I knew his autograph because I have tons of his autographs from him coming to visit me in the office. And right away I went, "Ben?" And then in the background, I heard ping. He hit one of the wine glasses like I asked. Now, right away, I wrote down and, timestamp the time of the night I heard the pinging noise so they could go back and check their audio tape and they can check their videotape to see if maybe I was just hallucinating or hearing things. But sure enough, on the recorder, that ping noise came through. So I know that Ben is still my buddy. Next. Okay, the old Navajo County Courthouse up in Holbrook. That's been there for a really, really, really long time too. And down in the right-hand corner there, you can see that that's where the jail was. It's like, it's on that floor and it's a little bit below there. And they use the building today mostly as a museum for, I think when I visited about 5 or 6 years ago, they were still doing some civil matters, court matters in there, but basically, criminals not there. The jail is not used as for criminals. But on the left-hand side on the second floor, that's where they kept the female prisoners because they didn't want to put them in the male population. So when we were there, I was there with my friend Cindy. We were upstairs. We were kind of poking around, exploring. They let us kind of wander, and we were in that room. So we had put down our equipment, and we were kind of walking around, asking questions. At that time, I had a backpack. It was leather, and it had fringe on it, like kind of like buckskin looking type backpack. And I put it on a chair. And as we were walking around, talking, looking at things on the wall, and talking to the spirits in there, kind of make them comfortable, let them know what we're doing in the room. I looked down in the chair, and all of a sudden, you could see it's like an invisible hand was playing with the fringe on the backpack. It was just, I think we actually got that on film that time, but it was just really odd because someone was recognized that kind of material, buckskin, and they wanted to play with it. Next. Okay, the Westward Hotel in Phoenix. Now, this was built about the same year as the San Carlos. I think it opened probably like 6, 7 months later. And this was your exclusive hotel back in the day, like the big resorts now. This was the place you wanted to be. I actually talked to a woman one time that told me that she used to come there in the 60s with her son when he was, you know, wanting to go to college at ASU. And so they were exploring the town at the same time. And this was their meetup point because the tower on top of it. They figured if we met up at the Westward Ho, none of us would get lost. And she says they would never let anybody in unless you were staying there and you had a key. John F. Kennedy actually stayed there. He recouped after World War II. So many actors and actresses have stayed here. They actually thought Al Capone's car was in the tunnels down below, but those were just air shafts because of, the help with the circulation of the cold air back in the day. Lots of interesting people have stayed at this hotel. Now, they don't let you in this hotel unless you live there. Now it's housing for the elderly and low income. So and there's security guards, so you have to have an invite. So about 12 years ago, we were invited by one of the residents to do an investigation because he was interested in ghosts. He actually kept a little journal about the ghosts of the Westward Ho. So he took us on a tour of the whole building, and we actually did a little fundraiser for them. We all brought canned goods for them. It was like the end of the year, November and December, and they were kind of running low in their little soup kitchen for the guests. So that was kind of a priority. There was probably like 20 of us that came, and we all brought bags of food just to kind of help them out. So they were more anxious to give us a tour. Now, one of the things they took us was back to the Thunderbird Ballroom, which is the building kind of adjacent to the main part of the hotel. And they were telling us about this ballroom was, the grand place where people had proms. They had, class reunions. There were wedding receptions, all kinds of things going on in this ballroom. There were big bands that came there to play. And they would always see a lady in red dancing around the ballroom. That's one of their frequent ghosts. And she would always be just kind of dancing around, and then she would fade away. So then about 3 years ago, I was asked to come back and see another resident. And so he took us on another tour. He says, I have to, ghost stories. Well, little did he know, it's probably the same stories that the other man told us, but I wanted to get back into the hotel, so it was no problem, dragging me back in there. So I think me and my friend Susie went that day, and we toured around. And that what they have done now is where the Thunderbird Ballroom is, they've made 2 more floors of apartments to give more housing. And that's where he lives. So he was taking us to show us that part. And I said, wait a minute. What about the lady in red? She has no ballroom to dance through anymore. So does nobody see her anymore? And he says, oh yeah, we still see her. And now she dances through one apartment and out the other door of another apartment and in a wall of another apartment. So she's one of those, residual energies that doesn't even know that she's, dancing in apartments. She still thinks she's in the ballroom. And of course, there's other stories about murders and people jumping off the building and shootings and all kinds of craziness. And that lady who visited with her son many years ago, she now has her own key because she lives there. And next slide. CROOK Tunnel. This is down near the U.S. border as well. And it's between Bisbee and Douglas. It's an old railroad line, a narrow gauge train that, connected the 2 towns. Now, I read about this place. I really wanted to go see it. So I went down one time, couldn't find it. Then I came back again with a couple of the guys. And it's always a good idea when you're down near the border to let the Border Patrol know what you're doing, so they won't be, checking you out. And we just said we were looking for a CROOK Tunnel, so they actually kind of directed us in the right way. So, when you're going down the old dirt road, you can practically reach out the window and touch the border wall. That's how close you are to the border. So we were following the train track for quite a while. There's no track there now, just the bed. And then we went a little ways, and then we lost the bed of the train, and then we could see on the other side again, and we're sitting on the top going like, okay, I'm not getting this. Where's the tunnel? Then we realized we were on top of the tunnel. So the story of this goes, there was a gentleman who was visiting the saloons in Bisbee, and he was making his way back home to Douglas. And he just followed the track. That was just the way he usually go because he knew that he would end up home eventually. But this night he had, partied maybe way too much. And so as he was getting close to the tunnel, he must have got tired. He sat down near the track, fell asleep. And of course, the train comes through. And the cow catcher on the train swooped him up, and part of him ended up there, part of him ended up in Douglas. So I'm thinking for sure, this place has got to be haunted. So we spent a good portion of a day exploring the tunnel, exploring both ends of the tunnel. On the other side, I actually found a piece of sandstone that probably a lineman when they were putting in the telephone poles had signed in the early 40s. And I took that home with me because I just thought that was like really cool. So it's down at my Bisbee house. Next slide. And probably everybody who's been in Jerome has had lunch or dinner at the haunted hamburger. You can't help it. You're exploring Jerome. The aroma will, drag you up there. I think that's part of their marketing. But anyway, this is what boarding house too, as many of these larger buildings always were in these mining towns. And the thing about when they'd have a boarding house, they could, rent it out to 3 different guys because they'd all have different shifts. So while one was sleeping, the other were working, and then they would just, and it would go on and on like that during the day. So they would just alternate the beds. Well, when they decided to make the restaurant back in the day, the owner was started working on things and remodeling things, and he would finish for the day and come back the next morning. His hammer would be gone. This has been, the big story on this. And he would, have to run down to Cottonwood or whatever and buy another hammer and come back, and then he would be done the day. Hammer would be gone. So then he started buying 1 or 2 of them, 3 or 4 of them. It's happened on and on and on. The hammers were disappearing. But, when they finished the restaurant and was getting ready to open, all of a sudden one day, all the hammers were back. So I don't know if the miners were helping him or not helping him, but it was just a little prankster ghost there at the restaurant. And, their menu is so cool because you can order a ghost burger. They kind of just play on that ghost theme all the way. Definitely haunted. Go upstairs and eat. Get spectacular views. Next. Vulture Mine. Okay. And the Vulture Mine is near Wickenburg, probably about 20 miles out. Back when we used to go investigate there, it was pretty much a ghost town. The buildings were falling apart. This was the old assay house where they, graded the ore for its quality. There were murders here because the people would rob the gold. So this place was very haunted because of the murders and such. The other buildings that were very active were the schoolhouses. They actually would hear the piano playing in the schoolhouses. The Bordor, where the ladies of the night worked. I know I was in there one night with one of the guests when we were practicing. Like they were doing some EVP work in their voices, and all of a sudden we heard the back door open up, and we could smell a very, very, very grungy, like an old, dirty, stinky miner, and that was kind of really odd. Up at the machine shop, I don't think you can get up there anymore, but there was a young gentleman who strap broke off one of the machines, the big machinery, and it decapitated him. So they see his ghost up there. Now they've had a new owner. He's come through and he's done extensive preservation on all the buildings, opened up buildings that haven't been opened in many, many years. And they actually do ghost tours here now. So you can go online and pull Vulture City and hook up with a really great tour there. They offer them probably once or twice a month. And then they actually have history tours during the daytime too. So it's a great place to go. And you'll probably run into a ghost or two. Next. Up at the Grand Canyon, you have the old HOPI house. And this was a Mary Coulter creation. She did a lot of the buildings up along the Grand Canyon. She was famous for her great designs and everything. Now in the HOPI house, when I was doing my Grand Canyon Ghost Stories book, we went to all these buildings because there was never a ghost book about the Grand Canyon before. So we thought, well, we're going to visit all the buildings, which we did. Got a bunch of my friends. We went and drove around for 2 days and talking to people. When we got to the Hopi house, the manager there's a gift shop in there now. He was telling us about that there was a hidden kiva, a ceremonial room inside the Hopi house, and they don't let anybody in there because someone had gone in there. They had a beautiful, beautiful sand painting covered with glass, but somebody went in there and destroyed it. Just being awful people. So now they don't let anybody in there because they don't want to destroy anything else. And now what they have are little prankster ghosts in this building. They believe, that could be some of the people who worked here because back in the day, they had Native Americans bring their crafts so you could buy real Native American crafts. They would do their work outside and you could watch them work. They danced outside. So they had apartments on the top floor. So they think sometimes they might be the ones pulling the pranks on the people who work there now. They hide jewelry, they change the displays around in the building. Friendly ghosts. But again, they just they also believe they want to keep people out of that ceremonial room where the kiva is because it's very magical. So that probably holds in a lot of interesting energy. Next one. The Mystery Castle in Phoenix. I know probably a lot of you have explored there. This was a really good opportunity. We used to do paranormal workshops a lot, and we brought our paranormal workshop down to the Mystery Castle. And we were really, really lucky because we got to have Mary Lou Gilley give us the tour. Now, Mary Lou and her mother and her father lived up, I think, in Oregon area, Washington area. And she used to go to the beach with her father. And he always promised her that someday he would build her a castle. Like fathers always promise all these wonderful things for their daughters. He promised her a castle. So she grew up always believing she'd have a castle. Or I think the father was one of these men. He loved his wife, he loved his daughter, but he was, not one to commit to stay and put for very long. He also claimed that he was very sick. So he came down to Phoenix for treatment. And then he bought this little piece of land. This was during like the 20s and 30s when Phoenix was on their big building boom, when all those, Art Deco buildings were being built downtown. So every day go into town, load up his wagon, bring it back, all the scrap material. And this is what he built. He built this beautiful, beautiful castle for Mary Lou. And so then when he passed away in the 1940s, she inherited, her and her mother inherited the building. So they had no clue what they were in for. They got down here and this was it. I mean, it was like maybe a little bit of electricity, probably no running water, very basic. But she lived here from the 40s until 2010 when she passed away at age 80. Now, I had to ask her if there was any ghosts. And she said yes, that her father's ghost was still there. She would see him on the back stairway quite a few times. And then she would feel him upstairs walking around. And then she says, but I also have the ghosts of my Dobermans were here. And I said, oh, how did that happen? She goes, well, for years and years, I had 2 Dobermans to kind of, be my guard dogs because I was out here and back then there was nothing there. So she had to have some protection. So of course, as dogs do, they pass away eventually. And then she had a couple friends come to visit sometime later. And they pulled up, they had just were in the neighborhood. So they were going to come visit her. So they had no knowledge they were on their way. So they got out of their cars and went up to the gate, and they said 2 Dobermans came running down and they were barking at them, and it scared them. They go like, I guess she must not be here. So we better go. We better go. So then the next time they came over, they did call ahead and so she was there to open up the gate. She says, well, I'm glad you're home this time. Because when we came the last time, your dogs came down, those Dobermans, and they would have ripped our throats out if we would have went through that gate. And she says, the Dobermans have been gone for probably 15 years. So she says that must have been their spirits because I have no dogs now. So yeah, spirit animals, they can happen too. And they are protecting their owner. Next one. All right, this is me sitting out on Madison Street down between the two cemeteries. If you know where the cemeteries are, they're off of Jefferson. One and then the Madison kind of divides them. So you have a newer part on the north side and an older part on the south side. Well, they were putting in a new sewer line on Madison Street. And as they began digging, as often happens, they started undercovering a little part of the Hohokam village that is underneath our cemetery. Yes, we have a cemetery built over an old ruin. And so here I'm sitting down. I loved going down there and I was watching them work and they were finding all the little pit houses and pieces of pottery and relics. And as they got closer to, I believe, 13th Avenue, they actually ran into a burial ground as well. So our old cemetery, which is very old, between 1884 and 1914, is buried over an even older cemetery from ancient times. So it was just, remarkable, the feeling of being down there, knowing that this ancient civilization that has disappeared, no one knows why, that their pit houses were still here. A lot of fun. Next one. And this is one of my favorites. I love the city of Globe as much as I love Bisbee. And this is the old jail, the 1910 jail. And you can see to the left is the old courthouse. Now, this jail, the main story of this one goes back, in the let's see what it is, about 1910 and 1911, there was a gentleman by the name of Kingsley Olds. Now, Kingsley Olds worked for a rancher, and they were coming into town with the two ranchers' daughters, who were young, preteen girls, and they wanted to go swimming in the river. So he said, oh, okay, we'll stop, because it was a hot day. They stop in the river, and he ended up strangling the girls. And so then he got a little nervous, and he said, okay, I got to make this look like it was an accident. So he shot himself in the chin to make it look like they were attacked. Well, people came looking for the girls, looking for him. They found him, brought him back, and they thought right from the beginning, this looks really suspicious. So he was being held in this jail, with his injuries so he could stand trial. And the nurse came in and sat outside his cell, giving him morphine so that for his pain. And the first night he was there, he told the nurse that he kept seeing the ghosts of the little girls, but he couldn't understand what they were saying. They were trying to tell him something, but he couldn't understand. And she's noted all this in the inquest paper. And the next night, he was, when she went to check on him, he told her the same story, except this time he says, I seen the girls again. They're coming for me and they're motioning me to follow them in death. Sure enough, sometime during the night, someone had climbed into the courthouse, hid in a room. So at the crack of dawn, they shot down from a window down into his cell, shot him dead. Now, there was never ever proven, but they believe it was the girl's father. He was an avid hunter and a crack shot. So shooting down into that cell was nothing to him. He basically walked out of the front door of the courthouse. People kind of turned their head. It was frontier justice. I was able to, this is the episode I was on with Ghost Adventures, and I told the historic story to Zach Bagans and the crew in the jail, and then they investigated during the night and was heard all kinds of strange things in the cells, because those cells, you could, when you're in there, they're banging. You hear footsteps in there. If you ever have a chance, they do a lot of organized paranormal investigations in the jail. You got to do one of those. We did one. We were the first ones that were actually allowed to spend the night, and it was the middle of January, so I think we made it to about 3 o'clock in the morning before we were freezing to death. And yeah, a lot of things were happening that night in the cells too. We heard voices. We heard someone, men, yelling at each other. Right, there's a connection. You can't see it there, but there's a like a walkway between the courthouse to the jail. They call the Bridge of Sighs. And someone actually filmed somebody on the bridge that night. It was a spirit. So it's very, very active place. Definitely need to go to Globe. Next. Now, the Gaston Hotel is in Douglas, Arizona, and this is where I kind of cut my tooth on doing paranormal investigations. When I worked at the MVD, it was like a handful of us. We would go down there and we did an investigation. We would come back to work on Monday and we would tell everybody all the crazy things that were happening there. And then we would have more people that want to go. So the next payday, we'd have 3 or 4 more cars. Sometimes we had about 8 cars caravanning down to the Gaston Hotel. And after a while, I would call down there on Friday night and say, "Hey, I need the second floor for all my investigators." And sure enough, we'd stay up all night, and weird things started happening. The worst thing I can tell you that happened there was one evening we had, the dreaded Ouija board out, which, is just no different than using a K2 meter. We don't know who's running that either. But we had the Ouija board out. So we decided we're going to ask, if Pancho Villa's ghost was there. Because the big story of the Gadsden is Pancho Villa rode his horse up the staircase and put a chip in the stairs. We don't know if that's true or not. The staircase, it was a big fire and the staircase fell in the basement. So that could have been a chip from the falling of that. But that's the legend for sure. And so when we were asking, we were asking, okay, if you're Pancho Villa, what was your wife's name? And it came up Maria, which, our one friend, he was very skeptical. And he goes, well, everybody's wife was Maria. He says, you guys probably already knew that anyway. And you're moving the board. And we're like, no, we're not. We're not doing that. And he goes, okay. So he goes, I'm going to ask it a question. And I'm going to ask it in Spanish, because I know you guys can't speak Spanish. And I'm going to ask it a question that only Pancho would know, because every cowboy or, rancher or whatever had a special horse, and that special horse had a name. So I'm going to ask him what the horse's name was. So he asked it in Spanish, Pancho, what was your favorite horse's name? So we're waiting, and this board spells out SHT. So you know what we're thinking, horse shit, right? And we're like, oh, okay, this is like really weird. And it's like, well, this makes no sense now. And then we just started getting nothing on the board after that. So we thought we'd go back to work on Monday. We told our supervisor at the time, and he says, I have a friend in San Francisco that teaches, Spanish and Mexican history, and he'll know the answer to that. So we said, okay, fine, yeah, let us know what that means. We have no clue. So the next day we come back to work and he goes, oh my God, you guys, you are actually talking to Pancho Villa on that board. And we're like, what? He says, no, seriously. He says, Pancho Villa had a lot of horses, but he had one that he loved the best. And his name was 7 Leagues. And so we're going, yeah, well, how does that come out to SHT? He goes, he loved to play word games. So he was playing a word game with you. He was just kind of using syllables. If you take SHT, and that would be Sahete, which is 7 for 7 leagues. And we're like, oh, we did have Pancho on the board. The other amazing thing that I saw in the Gadsden Hotel was a couple of us girls were staying there, and we were there for like 3 days. Nothing was happening. It was like, we were down here and we really, really wanted to have a ghostly thing happen. And the last day we were there, we were walking around the mezzanine and we started seeing this light. It was probably big as, I don't know, grapefruit, not that big around. And it was blue. It was like shimmery, oceany blue. And it was on the floor. And it was just like this circle of light. And it was like glowy and you could almost see in it. And then it would, dissipate, and then it would reappear about 2 feet away. And then it would dissipate, it would reappear about 2 feet. And we started following it around the mezzanine. And I got in front of it and it would come towards me. And I'd take about 4 or 5 steps backwards and it would still keep coming towards me. Granted, this is on the ground, but we're watching this the whole time. And I took about 3 or 4 steps away. And then all of a sudden there's a big whoosh and the light went over the edge of the mezzanine. Now, we really don't even know who that was or whatever, but we started, coming to a conclusion that we got this little ghostly name of Naza Naza, which I use for my email. If you guys know me, it's nazanaza@aol.com. And that's what we named the little Indian boy that they say is in the hotel. We gave him the nickname Naza Naza. So we asked the owner, like, did anybody ever talk about a little boy? And she goes, oh yeah, my kids tell me they play with him all the time because they lived in the hotel. And she says, yeah, they always talk about the little boy, and he's a little Indian boy, and they play games with him in the hotel. Well, I took my daughter down one time, and I says, you gotta look for this boy. And she was a teenager then, and she's like had nothing to do with this ghost hunting stuff. She's like, you and your friends. So they were sitting down in the lobby, a couple of her friends, just doing their own thing. And all of a sudden, though, I saw her jump up. And she goes, Mom, I just saw him. And I go, what? She goes, I saw the boy. He was walking along the mezzanine. He had long black hair. He was walking along. I watched him. Then finally he went past a pole and he disappeared. So that's the story of Naza Naza, how I got my email name, and the Hotel GADSDEN. Next. And also in Douglas is another smaller hotel called the Avenue Hotel. Now, if you look at the little gentleman on the far right, where the print of the date is, you might recognize him from Ghost Hunters International. He had another paranormal show this past year. That's Paul Bradford. Paul Bradford from the Ghost Hunters used to live in Tucson, and occasionally he would come out and ghost hunt with our group. This was another one of our paranormal workshops. Yes. And so we came down there and as guests, and the hotel was built in two segments. The really, really, really old segment was built at one time, I think like 1901, and then there's a newer segment was built in 1915. And in the old segment, there was a little lady who was I would say probably a hotel maid, and she was quite young. She had a quite a life, in just her 15, 16 years. And her name was Mabel McGee. And Mabel, as many young girls did back then, did a combination of like poison. They used to do the poison, and she drank some of that. They never, could revive her. She died in the hotel. They say her spirit's still there. There's also a barber shop in the hotel. I mean, it looks like you could got your shave and a haircut like last week. And this was our first investigation here, and we came back just probably like 4 years ago and did another one. And a lot of the ladies were saying they were picking up spirit of a barber in the barber shop, and he did not like women in his barber shop. That was the feeling they were picking up that day. And a lot of the people that are in this picture came back for the second round when we did it like 10 years later. So it was literally a lot of fun. Next one. Okay, yes, even the Arizona State Capitol has ghosts. And the story goes here, when the building was built and they were still doing some construction on it, and, everything was in session that day. They were having, coming up with all the new laws for Arizona. Well, there was a gentleman that was not happy with the way his land was going. His name was Frank Kaufman. And I used to come in here when they used to have the archives, because I would do my research too. I loved it. I love to read old newspapers. I love just digging around and learning all these stories. Well, the head archivist one time came up to me and says, we have a ghost here. And we have a ghost here in the Capitol building. And he says, check it out. I want you to do the research and find him. So I said, okay, we've heard about him for a long time. So Frank Kaufman came. He was not happy with his taxes. He was not happy with the way his land was being assessed. So he came in there one day, walked into the office of the assessment office and shot that man, walked out into the middle, where that little state seal is right there under the dome in the old part. And he committed suicide. For the longest time, I couldn't figure out why when I walked past her, why I had that icky feeling every single time, but now I know. And they also hear other things, things moving around in the Capitol building as well, especially in the old library areas and up in the attic where they store things. Very active area because it's holding a lot of history there, a lot of mystery of people have come and gone there. Next. Runkow Cabin is down near Tombstone. And when I was down there, this was way, way back, and I don't know, probably 2003, maybe. I'm not really sure now. But there was this new TV show that was coming on called Ghost Hunters. Brand new. They were looking for people to be in the pilot. So they invited us to be part of the pilot. They gave the job to some plumbers. Ah, they could have gave it to MVD agents. It would have been just as good. But my friend Mark and I went down to do our segment for the pilot. We thought this is the perfect location. So we drive down there Saturday afternoon, and we get down, go through Tombstone, start heading down to Bronco Cabin, which is a little bit kind of southwest of actual Tombstone. Have to go through a wash to get there. And we get up on the plot of land near the cabin, and all of a sudden this tremendous thunderstorm comes along. Lightning, thunder, things are flying, and winds blowing, the truck's blowing one way and blowing another way, blowing forward, we're blowing backwards, and we're like, oh my gosh, what do we get ourselves into here? And they were like, then it's raining like crazy, and we're like, man, we're gonna have to abort this whole thing. We're not gonna be able to get our equipment out to investigate. And suddenly it stopped. We thought, oh, okay, well, maybe it'll work. So we got out of the truck. And then all of a sudden we started hearing all this rushing water. Well, that dry little wash that we had just crossed was now a raging river. I mean, raging river. It was probably 30 feet wide, 6 to 10 feet deep. And then I'm like, okay, now what are we going to do? And he says, well, we have to wait it out. We can't go anywhere now. So we might as well start investigating. So as the water's rushing through, we're thinking, wow, this is really crazy. I stayed there at the cabin, and Mark took a lantern and he went up on a hill where it's been known all kinds of people are buried up there, because this was the big meeting ground for the cattle rustlers and the bank robbers. This little cabin, and they would divvy up the money, and sometimes it was easier to divide it by 3 guys rather than 5 guys. So they would, kill the others, bury them on the hill. So you'd get a bigger, amount of the monies. So I stayed there and I set up all my equipment, and I was sitting there on the bank and I'm watching, and all of a sudden I'm seeing people walking in that wet wash coming up towards the cabin. Now Mark had left me his rifle, and I'm like, I don't want to shoot anybody. So I just got in the truck and I waited for those people to walk up. Nobody ever showed up. I'm thinking, how could they? There was a wash there. It was water running through there. Am I seeing things or what? So I went back finally to the cabin, and I see Mark coming down the hill, and suddenly his lantern light goes out. So he comes back and he goes, I have brand new batteries in here, and I don't know what's going on. I'm halfway down, and it's like someone didn't want me to find my way back down the hill. I took off my glasses and I laid them on the ledge of the walls there, because I was trying to adjust the video camera, because the video camera started going crazy. It was going forward, it was going backwards. It was not operating like a video camera should. Then I finally got to work. I picked up my glasses. Both the lenses were out of my glasses, and I'm like, boy, someone is messing with us tonight. Well, we ended up filming. We ended up working on the project till probably about 1 or 2 in the morning, when the water had finally receded enough so we could get in the 4-wheel drive and go back across the wash and head home. Obviously, we didn't get the job on that new show called Ghost Hunters, but the plumbers did. Next one. Up in Congress, Arizona, there's 2 cemeteries there. We love cemeteries to death. I used to do a thing every year called Cemetery Crawl. I really wanted to be on The Amazing Race, but I didn't think I could probably bungee jump. I've got short legs. I'd be a handicap on the show. So I thought I'd make up my own thing. So instead of going to like 7 continents, 20 countries in a week's time, whatever it takes them to film The Amazing Race, I picked a weekend where we went to probably 7 counties and 20 cemeteries and called it the cemetery crawl. You had teams just like Amazing Race. They fought and cried just like an Amazing Race. We had the red team, blue team, green team, and they weren't winning any prizes like a trip to Hawaii or anything. They got like a little bag of crap of little fun little games and things like that. Well, this was one of our stops, and they were supposed to come down to the old Congress Cemetery because there's a newer one, not really new, but newer one up on the hill. And it was starting to get hazy that day because a snowstorm was coming. And so again, it was Mark and my friend Kenton. We were both sitting down at the bottom of the hill, waiting for the teams to arrive so I could do my, give them their clues for the next cemetery. Nobody was coming and nobody's coming. I know they were in Wickenburg, checking out a cemetery there, but nobody was coming down to this cemetery. Then suddenly all three of us looked up to the other cemetery on the hill, and we could actually see a couple people walking, kind of strolling through the cemetery. They were all kind of a grayish looking figures, but they were like strolling through like they were looking for, a loved one at the cemetery. And I said to the guys, they went to the wrong cemetery. You need to go up there and get them and tell them to come down to this part of the cemetery. So they got in the pickup truck. I says, I'll stay here in case another team shows up. You go up there and get those people and get them in the right direction. So I'm standing down there and it's starting to drizzle a little bit and I'm watching them and they're slowly driving through that other cemetery looking for whatever we saw, and nobody was up there. They came back and said, I don't know who we saw, but apparently they were a ghost because there's no footprints. There's nobody has walked through that cemetery. And then, so that was like a really an unusual time to actually see a ghost, but it was perfect because it was kind of hazy, dark out, not really, no sunlight going. And it was just a perfect setting for a cemetery and their ghosts. Next. Up in Williams, Arizona, there's the old Red Garter. The Red Garter has served as a boarding house. It has served as a saloon underneath during Prohibition. They, made it into a soda shop. And they say on the top floor there was a bordello with a madam. And they actually kind of, they play on it, putting a mannequin up there, making it look like it's one of the girls trying to wave you in. Now, you go upstairs for that front room there. That's kind of a large room. It's a very popular room to get as your own room. And a lot of people say that in the middle of the night, they'll wake up and there'll be a young woman walking around up there crying. She's kind of like, like she's holding on to something, and it's really kind of scary. And then she's just kind of weeping and then she disappears. A lot of people hear people coming up and down the steps. They're called the steps of endurance because, boy, that's a steep set of stairs you have to climb to get up to those rooms. If you ever stay there, there's no elevator. It's a hard walk up those steps. The owner of the hotel said when he was renovating, it took him several years, but he would often hear that door slam and people coming up the steps. The man who owned the saloon downstairs back in the day, he was quite elderly, and I think he was just tired of living. He slit his throat, so he got his energy in there too. But it's really a really nice setup in that bed and breakfast. And if you ever had a chance to stay there, there's only I think three or four rooms upstairs, full of history. Next one. Whoop. Back one. They're dancing. Okay, maybe we jumped one. Okay, next one here we got here. Yeah, this probably right. Yeah, the Congress Hotel in Tucson. And you probably, if you guys are from Tucson, you've probably been here before. And their big claim to fame is in the 20s, they had had some very unusual guests there. Yes, indeed. It was Dillinger's gang. Now, the story originally kind of, spells that sometimes they say Dillinger was there, but he wasn't. He was actually staying in a little bungalow not too far from the hotel, but his gang was there and they were up on the third floor. There was a third floor on the Congress Hotel at one time, and a fire broke out. And then, in their trunks, they had all their guns, they had all their money, they had all their goods. And they're like, how are we going to get this out? Because they wanted everybody to jump out the windows, like they did in the olden days, and not use the stairs. But they, paid off the firemen that asked them, can you like carry our things down? They're very important things. Or, we're sales reps and we don't want to lose our supplies. And so the police and the firemen carried all their guns and money downstairs, and they took, and then of course the Dillinger gang, were glad they made it out of there and took off. And then later, when the fire department dudes were sitting there, firemen were looking at their, crime magazines, they went like, oh, this man looks kind of familiar. And then they realized they helped the Dillinger gang escape. Well, now they knew that the gang was in town, so all points bulletin. They combed the streets, and of course, somebody probably had loose lips and led him right to Dillinger. So he was captured. Now, one of the other ghosts at the Congress Hotel that's been popular is a man who stayed there for many, many years, and he actually died in the hotel. And he was kind of he liked to tinker with things, and so he would walk around if he'd see a screw loose, or something that needed to be tightened. He would get little butter knives and he would tighten everything up. It was just something he did to pass his time while he lived there. And to this day, every once in a while, they find a butter knife laying around and they know it's that little ghost still doing his work, keeping the hotel looking spiffy. Next one. There we go. Now we're back to Jerome, to the Connor. Now, the Connor, I think, is my favorite hotel up in Jerome. I know, the big hospital is also very, very popular and has a lot of activity too. But I've always had the most popular and busy stuff going on at the Connor. And the Connor was a really nice hotel, even though behind it, there's the old Liberty Theater, and behind that were the cribs. So you're kind of borderline area. But the Connor was still kind of what was considered a nice hotel. And the spirit room there, they've had weird things happening in there because there was arguments between women. Then throwing acid at each other, fighting over different, their husbands and men. It was a crazy town, Jerome. Above the bar is room 1, I believe, and that is the most popular room because a lot of times when people stay there, they wake up in the night and they find a woman that's walking around in that room. This was another hotel where I was able to book all the rooms. I think there was one room booked to some other person that had it booked for years and years. I think he lived there, but we had the whole hotel to ourselves. And we were there in July, so it was warm. It was hot during the day. And so we were, we went out to dinner, we come back, we're getting ready to start our investigations. And sometimes we do other experiments. We had two ladies who just had finished taking life regression classes. So they want to do life regressions on some of us. So we were doing that. And, we were doing EVPs. There's supposed to be a room where a dog barks all the time. There's another room, and this happened when we were there. A couple were staying in the room, saw a man with a little bowler hat that they used to wear back in the day in their room, standing in there. So it was quite an active night. But then, when it got to be about 1 in the morning, all of a sudden that 110 day, it was like 30 degrees in the building. We have brought the energy down so much that we were taking blankets off the beds and we were walking around with the bedspreads and the quilts and everything. And it was a quite active night. We actually did have a little action. Like I said, we saw the man with the bowler hat. I don't remember if anyone showed up in room 1, but it was busy all night long with spirits walking up and down the hallway. Still my favorite hotel. Next. The Hacienda in Prescott. That's another very popular one. It was the story of the ghost named Faith. Now, the urban legend is that Faith and her husband popped in there on their honeymoon, and when she was in the room, he left to go get a pack of cigarettes and never came back. That's a traditional story that goes on in a lot of these ghost stories. Well, when I was up there on MVD business, they gave me Faith's room because they knew that I was a ghost hunter and they thought wanted me to have the Faith experience. So I jumped on it. It's a great room to have. Let me see. Let's see if I can find what room number that is for you. So if you go there, room 422. So if you go there, get that room. Well, I had Faith's room, and nothing happened during the day. But at nighttime came along, and I had the TV on. So I thought, okay, I'm gonna I started talking to the ghost. I said, I'm gonna shut the TV off. I'm gonna get to catch some sleep because I got more meetings in the morning. So, don't disturb me unless you have to. So it was a big queen size bed in the room. And I, laid there. I had the whole bed to myself. Felt really, really, really comfortable. Probably about 1 or 2 in the morning, I woke up. TV's back on. And I knew I had shut it off earlier. So I got up, shut the TV off, lay back down in the bed. A few minutes later, as I'm laying there, I feel someone sit on the bottom of the bed. I could feel the impression of someone sitting there. So I took my foot and I'm like scooting the body off. Lay there, and about 2-3 minutes later, I felt the bed go down again. Someone was, sitting on the edge of the bed. I said, okay, this has got to stop. I got to get some sleep. And I took my foot, went through the motions of scooting him off again. So then I remember the bathroom was on the right, and I hear somebody in my bathroom in the sink, and they're filling up like the glass in the bathroom, a glass of water. And I'm thinking, what's going on now? And then pretty soon I could feel somebody like hovering over my bed. And I look up and I can see a glass of water. So it's like, oh my gosh, she's gonna throw water on me. So I'm laying there, and I'm laying like this because didn't want to get all wet, but I wanted to see. So I'm waiting. I'm waiting to get soaked any minute. And then all of a sudden the glass of water disappeared. Now, the whole day I was there, that first day, every time it was back in the day when you still had keys, every time I put the key in the door, I was getting shocked. So I know there was a lot of energy going on in that room that day. Second day I was there, nothing happened at all. You never can predict it. Sometimes spirits are active, sometimes they're not. Next. And of course, also in Prescott is Hotel Vendome. Again, a story of the poor woman who was there, with her cat, Abby Burr, and her cat, Noble. And she was very ill. Her husband went to get her medicine, never came back. These husbands, I don't know. And anyway, so her cat, Noble, is probably more active than Abby Burr. And some say that that was kind of an urban legend name too, how this came about. A woman was there, and a group of girls were playing with Ouija boards, and they came up with, with the name Abby Beer. So, but they changed it to Burr. But if we don't know if she's real or not, because there's nothing about her in the history. But the cat does seem to be there. But sometimes he wanders around the hotel. I know with another building, we have done a paranormal pajama party where we had all ladies in here, rented all the rooms, and everybody had their PJs on all night hunting ghosts. It was a riot. But the girls across the hall from Abby's room, one of the girls is terribly allergic to cats, and she started having a reaction from a cat. So whether Noble wandered from the Abbey and Noble room across the hall to this other room, we don't know. But it's a very, very cool old hotel to visit too. Very haunted as well. Next. This is the Mesa Antique Plaza in Mesa. It used to be like an old Woolworth store. And we were doing an experiment that night. We know the TV show, The Haunted Collector, and how different spirits will be attach themselves to items and old antiques and things in your home. So we thought, well, with the whole building full of antiques, we will probably come up with something. So the owner of the shop knew me, and so he invited a few people of my group to come down and take part in this investigation. So we kind of divided all up into different areas of the antique store to see if we could, we had our equipment, EMF meters and different items to, see if we could pick up any energies. And we were there quite a bit during the evening. I don't think we really got a whole lot energy off the items like we were hoping. And plus a lot of those little cabinets that have the items in them have those, ultraviolet lights and things. So it's like that was pulling off a lot of energy too. But it was still a cool experiment to try. You always have to experiment and try new things. So that was our haunted collector adventure at the antique store. Next. Monte Vista Hotel in Flagstaff. This is another icon along Route 66. And a lot of people have an experience in this hotel. Now the room right under the MO under Monte Vista in that area, that's one of the busy rooms. I think it's the second one down, second floor down though. And they say there's a woman who sits in a chair and stares out the window looking over the streets of Flagstaff, whether she's waiting for someone to get off the train. Some people say that she knew someone who worked in the store next to him and she kept an eye on them. But if you leave the room, the chair will move. Sometimes the chair will rock on its own. So it's one that everybody wants. It's, when you go there, you want to get tell them you want the rocking chair room. There's also the Phantom Bellboy. Now, I always thought this one was kind of a legend until I recently learned they did have a bellboy who worked there in the hotel for many years. And it was during Prohibition, and he kind of knew where the booze was hidden. And also, he was murdered in the elevator, and they think it was of someone that, he was going to talk, where this hidden booze was somewhere in the hotel. Now, I have a friend that stayed in the John Wayne room. Now, she was expecting, well, this is going to be really great. I'm going to be in the John Wayne room, and John Wayne's ghost has been known to, be active in the hotel as well. She was there, with her husband at that time, and all he wanted to do was watch football. So she says, well, I'm going to go for a walk in the hotel and see what I can find. So she was walking up and down the hallways, taking pictures in the hotel. And as she was walking along, she saw a man walking towards her. And she didn't want to be rude. She didn't want to keep taking pictures of this man, he was walking to his room, whatever. But she kept an eye on him, kind of, was looking at all the names on the doors. They all have different stars' names on the doors. So he stopped at a certain door and went through the motions of putting the key in the door. He was very nice. He had like on a golf shirt, and he's khaki pants, and he was very tan, blondish hair. And she kept an eye on him. He looked, kind of 50s, 60s dressed. And as he did the door, he went inside the room, but he didn't go through the doorway. He went through the door. So of course she raced down there to see what room was this. It was Ellen Ladd, and she goes, that's who it was. She actually saw the ghost of Ellen Ladd walking in the hallway. So this is a very interesting place. A lot of spirits happen. And I did some research lately. There were a lot of deaths there, but they were just mostly travelers. There was a man who died in the lobby. He was traveling on New Year's Eve and died while he was watching a football game. Next one. All right, now we're down in Tombstone. This is the old Nellie Cashman's restaurant. Now, I loved it when it was this had this look to it. Now it is a Mexican restaurant called Margaritas. But when it was Nellie's, they also invited us to come and do an investigation here. And you can see it just looks inviting, looks like a ghost would be here. And we were in there that night. The stories they would say that, people will have dinner and they would look up and sometimes they see, men in that, Western attire walking in the door, those long coats like the Earps were. And then they would just disappear as they walk in. It's just phenomenal, and that building now. And I don't pick up that same impression when I stay to eat there now. But back in the day when it's Nellie Cashman's, you really do. Nellie Cashman ran this restaurant. She ran hotels in town. And it has it's one of those you touch the building and you can feel the energy in that. Next. The Nosker Hill Inn. We're back up at Globe again. Nosker was an old schoolhouse, and it's now a beautiful bed and breakfast. The rooms are huge. You can roller skate in them. They're so big. It's full of history, all kinds of wonderful old school desks, and the old chalkboards are still there, so people write messages on the chalkboards. And just a really friendly ghost area. I've never encountered anything really wicked here. When I go, I almost always stay in room 2. It has, I think, 2 queens and a smaller bed in it. And I was there with a friend. We were, kind of like getting stories for the book when my Sleeping with Ghosts book came out. And we were there and we were sitting in the middle of the room because it's huge. And she looked up and she saw this little bald man sitting in a chair by us because, most of my friends could see ghosts. I've seen maybe 3, 4. A lot of my friends can actually see and feel them. We saw this little man there. We later found him in one of the pictures in the hallway, and he was like one of the teachers or principals of the school at the time. So we thought that was really weird. We also, she was, laying on the bed, and I was standing next to the bed talking to her what our next plan of action, what we're going to do next was. And all of a sudden, like a little hand, it looked like a little ball, came from under the bed and hit me in the leg and pulled back. And of course, I'm diving down on the floor, looking under the bed. I got it, nothing was there. Like, okay, the ghosts are playing games with us. Now we have seen the little girl walking in that room. A lot of times when you're in the shower, which was the old cloakrooms, hear people playing with your water. You hear people talking to you, little kids in the room. Another room, they often hear a teacher talking in the middle of the night. And that particular room has the electrical boxes outside the wall. So I think that's pulling in a lot of current. And that's why a lot of people hear and see things in there. It's mostly playing with their brain. It's, the electric. And but I have heard people have seen balls of light floating across that room. So it's a very, very, very haunted old place. Very friendly spirits, but very active. Okay, and next page. And the Orpheum Theater downtown is just majestic, beautiful, beautiful place. The Orpheum has been there for many, 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 many years as well, and they usually have ghost tours this time of the year. But because of COVID, like everything else, we had to kind of cool that out, so we're not going to get to do that this year. And one of the ghosts they have there is she's known as either Maddie or Maggie, and a lot of people see her. She's mostly seen during intermission, and she sits towards the back of the theater in the back rows, and she usually has on a beautiful hat. And one of our friends, again, we do a lot of reenactment things, and she wanted to see, ask her where did she got that hat, because maybe she could order one for when we do reenactments in the cemetery. She could order a hat and be beautiful like that. So she walked, as she was going to the restroom, she walked up to the lady to ask her about the hat. And just when she got up to her, the lady disappeared. Now, other people have seen her, look back when they were going to intermission, and they'll see her sitting up there in the balcony. So she's a very frequent guest of the theater. And some people think she's a relative of the Nasas who own the theater, because she would be able to come there as probably often as she wanted to see a movie. And that's why she would come and come to the movie theater quite often and be very popular and love the shows. Another ghost, sometimes they say they hear people fighting on a stage, and there's nobody there, but they can hear like people tumbling and falling. And another time I was there for the production for Halloween a couple years ago, and I was sitting with a couple gals and that can see ghosts again. And they saw like a lady dance from one end of the stage while the organ player was playing. And then she went all the way across and went across the other end of the stage and disappeared. Another story I learned from the ghost tour people were that there's a cat they see in the rafters quite often, a little tuxedo cat. And I said, well, why would there be a cat? Did he just wander in? They go, well, when they were building the theater, there was often a cat that would come in and visit the workmen. And the workmen, after a while, kind of adopted it and give them bites of their lunch and such. So they were always in there, feeding the cat and attending to the cat. They gave him the nickname Tom. So if you ever see a cat while you're at the theater up in the rafters, just know that Tom has probably had more than 9 lives. Next one. Aha! So if you all like to read about ghosts, I have several books out, and one is Sleeping with Ghosts, and that's about all the haunted hotels and bed and breakfasts we talked about tonight, and many, many, many more. And it was my first book. That one's been out now since about 2003, so it's due for a facelift. Haunted Phoenix is one that came out last year, and I basically talking about all the downtown region of Phoenix. And just last couple weekends, Marshall Shore and I have been doing little walking tours of downtown Phoenix. So it was kind of a different perspective because normally we do a bus tour during the Halloween season, but we wanted to keep it small and safe. So we did a walking tour with just a few guests. It was a lot of fun because it's a different way of seeing the buildings. I also do one on the graveyard shift, and that again is the haunted cemeteries and historic cemeteries of Arizona, and it features all around Arizona. I have Grand Canyon Ghost Stories, which is the one that we did about the north, south, east, west ends of the cemetery. So very active book up there. And Dining with the Dead was one of my favorites, although doing all those stories, you kind of, gained probably 10 pounds because, you always had to eat where you were visiting the ghosts. So those are some of my books that are out, and you can get them on Amazon. I always, if you, email me at nazanaza@aol.com or find me on Facebook. I have two, my Debe Branning on Facebook, or I have my Debe Branning author page. You can order books. I always have them at home, and I can sign them and send them off to you. So if anyone has any other questions they want to present, I'm up for a couple questions if there's time. I don't know what time it is. Oh,
it's after 7:30.
So to go home.
We're gonna let folks go home. Well, I guess everyone's already home. But thank you so much, Deb, for sharing all of your stories with us. I hope that this got everyone in the mood for a little bit of some spooky season.
Go traveling. Yeah, go traveling.
I hope that you all have a nice evening. Thank you so much for coming.